Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. Actually, I just said that in the last interview, but now it's like really appropriate because you've got a kitten behind you. Dominica,
Yeah,
welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy cat playing day to
yeah.
talk with me about your stories in the Dystopia Triptych.
Oh my God, you have the physical copies. Is
Yeah,
that really them, or is it?
this is
Did you just?
them, and
Okay,
they're heading your way.
amazing.
And your name is on them and in them, and your stories are in here, and they are amazing. And
Uh-huh. Thank you.
that's what I want to talk with you about. Your writing, Robot Country, and some of
Yeah.
the ideas that go into these stories.
Uh-huh.
So, you've written kind of the first story that really got me thinking of America as a future apartheid situation,
Uh-huh.
those are your words in the third story.
Yeah.
You come out and say like
Yeah.
the new America is basically an
Uh-huh.
apartheid state,
Yeah.
and not just in a race way, because we
Uh-huh.
whites will be in a minority by the
Hmm.
middle of this century, and probably overrepresented in politics and social structures. But in another way, we will become an apartheid when we have way more thinking machines than we have
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and we will stay in charge of them. I
Perhaps. Yeah.
assume, yeah. But it's going to be wild when they greatly outnumber humans, and you're thinking about this way ahead of me and anybody else that I know of. So, what got you thinking along that path, and what challenges and solutions do you see ahead of us as we start to rule this majority that's going to be smarter, quicker, and stronger than us in a lot of ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, Robot Country kind of sees like the American colonial project as continuing, but with robots, as like robots kind of just taking over the country. They decide, oh, this land belongs to us now. Um, I, I've written previous stories about thinking about like the concentration of wealth inequality continuing into the future. So just like one or two robots just own all the money. And I'm thinking like, oh, what if just a couple of robots owned all the land? So so I was definitely looking ahead politically, but also just wanting to write science fiction with a ton of robots in it. That's a good excuse. I feel like we're getting to the point um, where automation is becoming so critical that science fiction that's set like in the near future starts to feel like dated if it doesn't have robots in it. Just
Yeah.
the same way if you read like science fiction that's written in the past and there's no mention of cell phones, that can be kind of dated too. So I'm starting to feel like we're getting to that transition point where robots are going to start doing a lot more of the jobs. And I wanted just to make really weird robots. Like I'm fascinated by bio-inspired design. So a lot of the robots look like animals.
Yeah, the spiders and
Yeah,
yeah.
they had Louise Bourgeois had her spider sculptures on display at the SF MoMA, and they were just like amazing. And so I definitely took from her like, what if these things could move? What if they were sentient? And then there was this amazing book called Underbug by Lisa Marginelli that she wrote about termites. And like termites are really interesting. Like termite societies like use sociality. So I guess what I'm getting at, I'm just like trying to combine all my interests. And then like I decided that I wanted to go hiking, which is not a thing that I really do or did, you know, like sometimes there are things that you want to do and you do them, but there are other things that you want to do but you don't really want to do, otherwise you
Yeah,
do them.
our
You know?
our aspirational hobby.
Yeah, I guess maybe
I
like I
want to I
want to
want to
be.
know how to play guitar, but I'm probably
Yeah,
never going to take
yeah.
the time to do it.
Exactly. So I wrote a story where there's like a lot of hiking. Also inspired, I read this really great book called Fire Season by Philip Connors, who worked in the Gila National Forest where the robot country's set, and his job is a fire lookout. So he's looking out for fire all summer long and calling in the fires, and it's just a great memoir. I went into that book like thinking like can't like a robot do this job, and I came out of that book thinking, oh no, robot can't really do this job.
Yeah, it's weird our blind spots as science fiction writers. Like
Yeah.
we concentrate on the wrong thing and miss something
Yep.
else. And
Yep.
I'm also, it you also have to balance how you write a story so that it's approachable from today's audience. Like if you have to keep enough things the same that you can
Yeah.
understand the story. I think the distant future, which I've written some stories in, will be so alien that we can't even write those stories because no one will consume them. And so I have to like compartmentalize how I think the future will be and the kind of story that I think someone will actually want to read. But you have really wide interests. You have computer math
Yeah.
background, and
Yeah.
you come from a very rational, logical world. Does that
Uh-huh.
give you an affinity for robots, you think, that you take into your writing?
That's a great question. I mean, I majored in pure mathematics when I was at Berkeley, and I don't really feel like I use it that often in my fiction, but it just taught me how to like really persist and how to sit with like difficult stuff. So, and then I'm married to a robotics engineer who's also working in bio-inspired design, and I have a lot of friends who are scientists. So I just really like learning, and writing a story is a great way to learn about it. So I usually do a lot of research before I write the story. So it was kind of good to get this opportunity to write like 3 stories that were set in the same universe, because you can do all this research and you can get like 3 stories out of it instead of just one.
Yeah, and you've written other stories in this robot country world.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have a plan to consolidate them and turn them into a novel, or
Yeah,
what's
it
the
would be.
future?
There's one more on light speed. So the first one, 1,000 Beetles in the Jumpsuit, in the first volume is a reprint from Lightspeed magazine, and then there's another one, and the name escapes me. I should have written it down. You can.
Speaking of names, the title of your second story is
Yeah,
"The Paradise Requires
requires a wall.
Walls."
Yeah, uh huh.
Requires a wall. I love that title.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but only because it's so dark. Like the idea
Yeah,
that if you create, an ideal world, you're
yeah,
gonna have to try to keep people out of it. How
yeah.
um, how do we break down? I think of it also as the rope ladder syndrome,
Hmm.
which is when people get to a better place, they often want to pull the ladder up behind them and not let the next person in.
Yeah.
How do you think we get beyond that and stop thinking of the idea of paradise being in limited supply? Because it doesn't seem like that's the case. It seems like the more people flourish, the more abundance there is for everyone. It doesn't run out, but it's like this million-year-old reptilian part of our brain that thinks if we don't, if someone else gets it, then we don't get it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so so first of all, just as like a thought exercise, I came up with a thought exercise that I cannot solve, which is like, say you had like a utopian society, and I know this is supposed to be like a dystopia triptych, but I kept just thinking about it in like utopian terms, because those often just like coexist. Like one person's dystopia is actually another person's utopia. Like it's
Totally.
actually a society that's really working just only for certain people. So, but what if you had this sort of like perfectly functioning society, and everyone had a job and everyone was really happy, like everyone just had their role and everything fit, and then somebody wanted to join that, like would everyone have to change? It's like, if you think of society as like a puzzle and everything's fitting together and you want to add one more, how could you? uh so I'm probably like thinking about it the wrong way, but also just kind of like the paradox of heaven. It's like there's this place that's only for good people, but if there's a place that's only for good people, maybe it's not a good place if you're really trying to segregate yourself. That's why I started watching the show The Good Place. I wasn't interested in the premise at all. It was like, oh, these people are in heaven. That sounded really boring. But then there was like this twist. I read about it in the New Yorker.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil it for anybody,
It's
but
been
I
out.
read
It's
this.
been out long. Like the show's
Yeah,
over
so it's like,
now.
oh, they were in the bad place. That was a twist. And I watched the show, but I was like a little impatient. It seemed like too slow to dawn onto the characters that like a place that has only good people is not actually a good place. So
Yeah. That's so getting to the idea of walling off people.
yeah,
Also, in your stories, it's
yeah.
definitely you choose to be part of robot country or not. It's a big decision. It's life changing, and it's a very us versus them, in grouping out grouping kind of
Yeah.
world. And it makes me think of um middle school, high school cafeterias. Like we
Oh,
segregate ourselves
yeah,
based on so many factors, not just the color of our skin, but gender, um,
yeah.
our hobbies, the way we dress. Like we just look for so many ways to segregate. And I've spent most of my life living in places that are very multicultural.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a lot of people in the country today in the United States who think the world would be better if people were siloed off and we had more segregation. Um, do you think that's something you can only believe if you've never lived in a multicultural situation, or do you think we're going to progress to a future where people are more and more discomforted with, like, the reason I bring this up, one in the third story, just to spoil a little bit, one of your characters um, has something I've always dreamed about. They start making copies of themselves
Uh-huh.
to get more done.
Yeah.
Which, if you're like me as a writer, or
Uh-huh.
I know
Yeah.
a lot of people who would love to be able to do that. Like
Uh-huh.
you go do the dishes, and I'll sit here and think about my
Yeah.
plot all day.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I'm not phrasing the question great, but um, for me, it seems like this desire to be around people like us or to have copies of ourselves. It's this very egocentric desire,
Yeah.
and it would be the death of all that's great about society. And I
Uh-huh.
think, I don't know, getting more people to realize that and to stop clinging to needing
Yeah.
mirrors of ourselves around
Yeah.
is part of the dystopia that your story
Yeah.
unlocked for me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of like a little bit more poignant now because we're all kind of in our house, hopefully, right? We're sheltering in place. And so we're almost like more separate than ever before. Um, and there's really like raging debates on my next door, like what to do about, like, I live in San Francisco, about like what to do about the homeless population. Thinking of like the making of the copies of yourself, I think um, that's almost like a technology I feel like rich people have already. Like every time I'm doing the dishes or cleaning up, I'm like, oh, if only I could pay someone to do this. I
Yeah.
think it's so unfair that some people can outsource parts of like the boring parts of their lives. Like I could just, instead of house cleaning, I could get more like writing or reading done. And so it's like the rich, they live longer, not just because they have a higher life expectancy and a higher quality old age, but they get more out of their day because they don't have to do their own dishes. I was also reading about like human brain emulation. Robin Hanson wrote this book called The Age of M, which is like a non-fictional book. It's kind of ridiculous, but I also kind of loved it, which is like imagining a future where everyone can upload their brain to a computer. And so that was a very inspirational for that story, just thinking about what kind of societies would emerge.
Yeah, I wonder. It's we seem to be approaching two different worlds where we try to put our brains in computers, and we try to put computers in bodies
Yeah,
like ours.
yeah,
And before all these stories about robots, like humans have been the robots for the wealthy or the dominant
yeah,
class for a long
yeah,
time.
yeah.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
slavery was a system of basically getting a robot to do things for you,
Mm-hmm.
and ending that system hasn't ended the gap, because now, like you say, you just pay for that.
Yeah.
What do you think will happen, since you live with a roboticist and you write these stories? What's going to
Yeah.
happen when robotics becomes super useful and also very expensive? How is that going to impact our inequality?
I mean, there's this coming surge of automation that could put a lot of people out of work. It could cause a lot of misery, like economic misery, for certain people. So we kind of have to decide whether we're going to be a society that wants to take care of everybody, or we want to be the kind of society that just kind of lets people fend for themselves, in which there's going to be like misery. So between looking at advances in automation and seeing how much hardship there is right now in the pandemic, I just support a universal basic income. And then that would give people more freedom to pursue jobs that are meaningful for them. Because, yeah.
Yeah, for me, UBI would be such
Hmm.
just for the unleashing of the of creativity. You know, there's
Yeah.
so many smart, creative people out there who are
Yeah.
doing drudgery,
Yes.
and some of the people who think we need to go like live among the stars and have many more like trillions of people in order to have more Einsteins and
Uh-huh.
Mozarts. We have millions of Einsteins and Mozarts right now, and a lot of
Yeah.
them are like, you know, taking food from where it was
Uh-huh.
cooked to where it was going to get eaten,
Yeah.
and checking things out. And yeah, I agree with you. The automation world should provide the basic needs. It seems to me that there might be a delay between robots being bad for the poor and then being great for the poor, because it could be that providing becomes so cheap that building someone a house is as easy as just saying, well, yeah, in your spare CPU time, just build this person a house. And but what I fear is like how we're going to get through the transition phase.
Yeah, and I think just having the struggles right now with the pandemic is just pushing automation to kind of to speed up. I just finished reading this really good biography of Keynes called The Price of Peace. I didn't know anything about economics, so I felt like I had to learn about it. But he kind of he's like very influential. Like he's the reason we all got these stimulus checks, and he was kind of the architect of the recovery, the New Deal, in
Yeah.
a sense. But he also just envisioned us living in this like great society. All of his friends were artists, and he wished he was an artist. Like he tried to dabble in art. He was a genius, but not like an artistic genius. And so he thought, he wrote a long time ago that by this year that we all really would only have to, each of us would only really have to work a 15-hour work week. And it's like his calculations, like they pencil out. He's
Yeah.
right. It's just he kind of presumed that we would all take on like the burden of work equally, which we decided not to do.
I think I've seen those calculations, and they also assumed that the only things that we would need were the things we needed to survive and be happy at the time. Like no one, you know, foresaw how much money we would spend on leisure activities
Yeah.
or home technology and how big our houses would get.
Yeah.
So I think the amount of hours it takes to feed and shelter and clothe yourself is like gone to a fraction of what it used to be.
Yeah. People call it the post-scarcity economy.
Yeah, and and some countries and companies are now toying with a 3-day weekend and a 4-day work week, and
Uh-huh.
finding that people are just as productive. They get everything
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. That'd be great.
Yeah,
We should
well,
do that.
I feel
So
like a lot of us now are like 7-day weekends, or like time just has become so relative and meaningless.
yeah.
Another thing I'd love to hear your viewpoint on is what the pandemic has done as far as accelerating our socializing through machines and like not doing this interview in person, and how much permanent damage will do to our ability, to our desire to be in the company of people that you could see coming out of this.
Yeah, it's almost the kind of thing that I don't really want to think about because we're still like in the middle of it. You know, you have this mentality like I just have to get through. I can't think about the later. I just have to kind of get through today. So it's a lonely time. There are benefits. Like I just took a ballet class this morning in my living room. So, and that was before in before times, it was really hard to get like a Zoom ballet class because there was like this insistence. It's an older art form. You have to come to the studio. You have to be at the bar. And I mean, it is better if you're in person. But I'm glad to have it like in my living room. And I also teach a writing class. And so now I used to teach it in San Francisco, but now my students like come from all over. So you're making these connections that you wouldn't get to before. You're having these experiences that you wouldn't get to before. So there's that.
It seems
I
like
wouldn't
so
say
much.
it's better.
Yeah, it's just so different, right? It's like so many things are changing in such a
Yeah. And
short
so that's how
period of
because
time.
I have a lot of grief of the things I'm missing. So I'm trying not to think too much about the things I'm missing. I'm trying, oh, what are the benefits of now? It's not going to be like this forever. Like what are the parts of now that I'm going to miss when things go back to normal or go back to whatever equilibrium they'll find? So.
Yeah, it's interesting how many people I know who've said like I'm just too busy. Like God, I just need a week at home to catch up.
Uh-huh.
And instead of seeing, this is a forced opportunity to do some of those things, it's like
Yeah.
you think about all the things you can't do. But that's human nature. I think the way you're able to reframe it in a positive way is a useful lesson.
Yeah,
And
that's how I'm trying to get through. Sometimes it's terrifying to have as much time as you need, because I've done like usually during the summer I do like an artist residency. Like I wrote two of these stories when I was in Las Vegas doing an artist residency, and they gave me my own apartment, and so all you have is time. And so if you can't get the work done, then you feel like it's really your fault, and that's stressful in its own way. Because in your ordinary life, if you're not getting it done, you can blame it on something else.
yeah, you have other things in your life.
Yeah.
What was the fellowship you did on the East Coast, like the McDowell?
Yeah. I'm having a hard time because it used to be called the McDowell Colony, but like 2 days ago they dropped Colony. So I want to call it like the McDowell, but it's just, you just call it McDowell. So I did a residency at McDowell, and then I've done 2 residencies at iPark. McDowell's like heaven. It definitely has a
I
wall
wanted to
around
ask
it.
you
It's
about it.
really hard to get into. They don't just let anybody in.
Yeah, it's a small number of people, and it's
Yeah.
it's just based on your artistic excellence. I can
Yeah.
only dream of what it would be like, but it's you're around other artists. Like so when you're not doing
Yeah.
your work, all of your meals and your free time.
Yeah,
is
everything is
around other
taken
people.
care of. So that's perfect. I loved it there, but it was also kind of scary too, because it's like, oh, if I can't get it done, then it really is my fault. And then sometimes you weirdly get like a little bit of residency blues, because you're like, oh, things are perfect. Why am I not happy? So
Yeah.
you're
Um,
still you. I mean,
yeah, that's a good lesson. I see a lot of people like rearranging their lives trying to find a different self. But
yeah,
in your stories, maybe we have a recipe for that. You just
yeah,
do a little firmware upgrade and
yeah.
make another copy, make some changes. I love your story, and I can't wait to see where you take this, and maybe if you flesh this world out some more. It's fascinating, and I think it's pretty prescient. There's some
Yeah, thank you.
challenges we're gonna have to face that not a lot of people are talking about. So thanks for bringing them to our attention. Thanks for writing these stories. Can't wait for you to get your hands on them, and
Yeah,
look forward to what you come up with next.
yeah. Thank you.